Welcome to Duncan Thorin Shield's YouTube channel. I managed to con Duncan into convincing his friend to pay me thousands of dollars as a professional Counter-Strike player, so maybe he can convince you that some of his analysis is correct.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin. My guest for this one is going to be Pita, who is a long-time Swedish Counter-Strike figure. He used to be a pro player back in 1.6 and early CSGO, and he's obviously been a coach since then. So, Pita, we actually did do like a reflections back in the day, because obviously you had this long period where you unofficially and then officially coached NiP, right? I actually wanted to start there, which is what happened after NiP. Like, why after this wasn't there like a bigger gig? It seems like after that you had to sort of scramble a bit. Is there something happened? What would you say?
I think after NiP, what happened, I remember the first thing that happened was that me and you had a talk. I think it was right about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost on the day. But yeah, a lot of things happened. I think the most like the elephant in the room obviously is the coaching bug scandal that happened.
Sure.
Which meant that I was away for, I think my total time was maybe 9 months.
It was supposed to be like three. Oh, right, the actual ASIC ban you meant, but it also was like the 3 major ban too. But that's now passed in case
exactly.
people don't know.
Yeah. So I had those 9 months. Eventually, ASIC turned it down with, I think it was 45%, if I remember it correctly. It was a while ago, so I can't remember. But yeah, that happened. So I didn't work at all during that time, and then obviously. I wanted to get back into coaching again, so I joined up with Copenhagen Flames, which at that time was not a big team and they didn't have any like big names. At least for me, I hadn't like followed them that much. I knew a little bit about Roy because we played against him with NiP in Budapest when he was playing for, I think it was Mad Lions.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, or Tricked us, one of the two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it was Tricked actually in that time. So I knew a little bit about him, but the rest I didn't know. And obviously, I think that was one of the coolest experience I've had as a coach. You know, coaching a bunch of guys that maybe were pretty unknown to the international scene, and then within a couple of months, obviously. Being famous all around the world in the esports scene or in the CS scene in particular. So I did that for a while, and then I was approached by Dignitas while I was on Copenhagen Flames, and I decided to take a step into Dignitas, going with Dignitas, and I did that all up until they decided that they had to withdraw from CS, and obviously they had a lot of people laid off from Dignitas, so I think it was a financial decision for them to step away from CS. And after Dignitas, I had a couple of offers that I did not take because I learned a couple of things from my transition from Flames to Dignitas. So I tried to, I tried to not make the same mistake again. So I was away for a while, but then obviously I got back with syrsoN Nation, and I was with syrsoN Nation from July all the way up until now in January, basically. So since the end of January, beginning of February, I have not had any team yet. So.
Let's address all the big topics. So the first one I'll ask you at the beginning is the reason why I actually imagine for you personally, it must have been quite a blow to have that whole coaching bug scandal thing also backlash onto you and affect you. As if people don't know, you're someone famously, I mean, you even used that reflections interview, you're someone who famously has called out people if you think they've cheated, like famously at the Flusher one, obviously back in the day when those Na'Vi players were looking at the screen, like you're someone who normally you speak out if people have done stuff. So was it hard? I mean, I guess part of your identity is you think of yourself as an honest person, right?
Yeah, I mean, morally, I think it was a big hit. All of this, not really trying to make me sound like it's sad about what I did. I really need to own up to the mistake. Obviously, the first things first is I had two situations I remember. One was one round versus Astralis, which lasted during the pistol round, and I'm not sure if it was the full pistol round or not. And the second one was obviously against Mousesports, which was 8 rounds or 7. I can't remember, but yeah, I think the first round I have like totally did not even think about it. The second one though, versus Mousesports, that one I did remember, and for me it was, I knew I did wrong right when obviously when I did it after those 10 minutes. Me reaching out to Valve about it. I know we have also talked about these things, and I a lot of people flamed me for trying to reach out to Valve through Twitter, but for me that was like a normal contact point, because just 2 or 3 months prior to that, we had already had a conversation through Twitter DMs.
Okay, right.
So for me, it just made sense, and yeah, I sent that DM to them right after, knowing that if they bring this thing up, obviously I will be cancelled within the CS community or whatever. But that was the only way for me morally to go with it. And I tried once more 5 months later, I believe, in May, which I also posted those screenshots. But yeah, nothing really came out of that. And then obviously when everything came out, it was a big blow. And I could have done as some other coaches did, try to get some lawyers into it and clear off my name. And obviously difficult for ESIC maybe to prove it also.
Sure, yeah.
And the time consumption for them to also have their lawyers against my lawyers. I was like, I'm just gonna own it. And yeah, that's how it went. So obviously the reactions from the community, you have one side that was very much against it, which I totally understand, but also I did get a lot of positive feedback, which I didn't expect to get from something that I did. So yeah, I am a little bit past that. I have come to the sense of that was the past. I made a big mistake, but I try to learn from it and try to become better. And also as a coach, I try to I have done some stupid shit, so I try to teach, especially the younger players, what they should say, what they should focus on, not focus on, leave stuff that is not worth putting time into. Yeah, that's pretty much it, regarding that.
As I mentioned, obviously the other part of the ban was you had a 3 major ban. A bunch of people who are coaches got these bans, and one of the direct consequences of this was the first major that we had was PGL Stockholm in your home country. And even though actually, if people remember, Copenhagen Flames just missed out actually on making it to the playoffs, I'm sure not being able to attend that major, I mean, it was basically almost the end of your time with Copenhagen Flames at that point, right? That was probably a big deal to not be able to attend the major.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think anyone of us expected even going that far, even making it to the major. Because I remember I had that talk with HooXi right before the event, and the event itself was IEM Fall, which was the RMR back then.
Yeah.
And I remember we had that talk, and I was like, you know what, just go in. We need to get some, experience up. We are playing some really, really good teams, and everyone was 100% sure we're not going through. We're just there to learn, so we can become better in the future. And then obviously when we went 5-0 in the groups against G2, Big, Fun plus Phoenix back then, I can't remember the last team, but yeah, it was really good. And but then obviously when we made it to Stockholm, or the team actually made it to Stockholm, that was also during the COVID era, so there was a lot of restrictions going on, especially for the CS players. Like me as a coach, I could not go and visit them. So it felt really awkward being at home, knowing that the team is 10 minutes away,
right?
And I can meet them, and yeah, it was really, really weird. But I think they were really supportive also, because we also talked about all these things. We were not trying to shy away from what happened prior to this. So we were that topic was already off the table, and we, tried to make the best out of it. And obviously, me not being there also enabled me to work much, much more than I think I would be able to do with them. In terms of preparing for our opponents and stuff like that. So all in all, I think it went really, really good. We were just one overtime, I think, away from making it to
it was close
to the quarters. Yeah.
Here's my question. Famously, it was actually when you came on an episode of Snake and Banter, where obviously people knew you were the coach of HooXi before in the Copenhagen Flames time, and we knew at the time the rumour was he was going to G2. You said that famous line where, like, look, he did make it spicy as fuck. There's almost like what I would tweet, but you made it like he's even better than Khan, who's like one of the most legendary 1.6 IGLs, and was your 1.6 IGL if people don't know. So it's like just a hater comment, right? Obviously, since then, HooXi's had some success. He's obviously had the 3 big titles. He had a major run now. Can you give us some thoughts? What was he like to work with back then, and what were you seeing that you thought could work at an even higher level? Who was HooXi to you?
I think HooXi was a really, really strong individual. Strong in that sense, he had a lot of character and his belief, how he wanted to do it. I think he was also very smart. Could be a bit stubborn, but once you talk him through something or have a proper discussion, he could also, understand. He was very willing to learn, and I think he was all about this Mamba style, as Kobe. Like he really believed in hard work, and he made my work a lot easier because I've been to teams where the motivation isn't there, so you're 50% of your time as a coach is motivating the team. While here in Copenhagen Flames, it was like maybe 5% just to add some fire to the flame. But apart from that, it's just 95% me of actually focusing on the game, which was looking back at NiP, that was totally different, because in NiP was more of me trying to stay positive and motivate them to actually be there, because I had players that had won everything that they could win. So how do I spark the fire again for them? While in Flames, it was totally different. So HooXi was a big part of that. Demanding stuff from the players, obviously in cooperation with me, but I think we had a really good sync, me and him. I remember when he was about to get picked up from G2, I remember I told him, like, don't change who you are, because I know the players in G2 can, like, they also obviously have strong mentality, strong characters. And I told him, like, a little bit the culture that I'm from, which also is the same as Hunter and Nico, is like, you need to, speak up. Don't let people just run over you.
Right.
Be the guy who you were with me, and I'm sure you will, in the long run, you will make it. So, yeah.
The funny thing about that Copenhagen Flames lineup, if people remember it, is I actually do remember at the time when it was having this pop-off at IM4, then going to Stockholm, and then in the following year, everyone was looking at, like, Roy had, like, way bigger stats. Everyone used to remember, he used to be, like, the fucking just raw entry player in Mad Lions. Then he had, like, Nicodos was the ARPers, he was getting some attention. What's funny is I actually remember it wasn't Jabbi who got all the sort of plaudits, and everyone was raving about, you got to have this guy in this team. But people know when he went to Heroic, he became fucking amazing. He just, like, suddenly became one of the best players in the world. Who is Jabbi? Who's this guy? How do you use him?
I think Jabbi as a person is a very goofy guy. It's like, in every class, you always have one guy that's super goofy. For me, that was Jabbi. A really fun guy in that sense, and, a very, very important puzzle to a team for the team chemistry. But at the same time, I think he was extremely good individually, and he had he has a brain. Like, when he gets something, he really gets it. But you have to, like, get him to that point. So me and Jabbi spent a lot of time together just watching his demos. Obviously, we would also watch other players' demos, just to get some sort of, try to see what they're doing. But he was, very much straight up. When he had a good time, good period, he was always, like, taking charge. He could also make calls over HooXi. Is like he was like, just listen to me. I remember we had one game at Overpass. I can't remember exactly who we played, but he was like, HooXi was trying to call something, and he was like, HooXi, listen to me. Let's just go in monster. And HooXi obviously did that, and we just went and win the game. So obviously he is a guy that listens a lot, but also comes up with a lot of initiative. Also, very easy guy to work with, and I think, I think every team would, every international squad would like to have him on the team, I think.
What about Nico does then? Because it seems like he's had more of an up and down career. He was in FNATIC, now he's in the heroic squad, but it seems like he hasn't quite found the place. Like I say, a lot of people actually thought this was the player that was going to have the big career and probably be in like an Astralis type team. So who was Nico?
Yeah, I remember when I joined, he hadn't been on a team before that. I think like his post, like the pinned post that he had on Twitter back then was like him making a 1v5 Deagle ace in a practice game. Like no one is posting that kind of shit like, during practice.
Sure.
Like that's the thing that you leave out of the picture. But for him, it was a big deal doing a 1v5 during a practice. Okay, so that was the kind of guy that I was working with at the beginning. But obviously he was also like everyone in that team. I think this was a big thanks to Warburg, who was also like the sports director back then. Is like everyone was willing to work. I think he's a big part of it also. So I don't forget about Warburg. But for Nico, he was also willing to learn. Watching demos together, and I also remember I talked some things through with him because he played CS that you play when you play with friends and face it. You like he is the operator that was re-peaking all the time. And I just tried to explain like going with a very passive opera in terms of simple, and just like trying to compare him to simple, and like okay, and I even showed him like the exact same scenarios. Like here you are, here is simple. This is your reaction. This is simple's reaction, and then I'm obviously trying to explain why simple is reacting the way he is, and so all in all, I think. My time in Flames, I was working mostly with Nicolas and Jabbi, and also I also thought like Nicolas had a bright future. Like him going to FNATIC, I think that was I expected a lot more during his time there. I'm not sure exactly what happened, why they removed him, but then he got back to Prezi and he had like super solid stats in the beginning of CS2. But yeah, right now. He hasn't been that convincing in heroic, to be honest. Not on the same level as Jabbi, for me at least.
By the way, one thing I do want to ask you, because I've just done a whole series of interviews with the players who obviously have all the stories about NiP, but what people won't know, Peter, is they're your era. People like Plopsky, these sorts of guys, Nork, Hampus, like some of these are your players. They're the players you brought in the end of your era of NiP, right? So I notice a lot of them have the take that, like, look, they're not happy with a bunch of things with NiP management, but I actually think one of the things they seem a bit annoyed by is they almost feel like they were brought in too early, if you know what I mean, because we're all pretty young guys, pretty inexperienced. And I think their implication is like, if you sort of have a bad start or you're put in a rough spot in your career or you don't get your role or whatever, it can set like a bad reputation or people think they know who you are, right? What do you think about that whole era? I don't know where you're at currently on where NiP is at, etc. So what's your vision of that? Because I know when you brought in people like Plopsky, like the premise was when Get Right and Forest sort of went out of the game or to a low level, these would be the new stars of NiP, right?
Yeah. I remember we had a pretty rocky period with NiP back then when we brought in Plopsky. I think everything started off from removing Exist when I joined, because everything past that, obviously we had a team, but it was never like a stable kind of like, okay, this team I'm going to have for at least a year and a half, like this squad. It was always like something will happen, and I think towards the end, and this was in the middle of 2019, so a year and a half into the NiP project, I knew like, okay, Get Right will be leaving this team, and we need a strong rifler from Sweden. And prior to this, like what people don't remember maybe is that NiP and FNATIC was Swedish. We were just like changing players with each other. Sure. Like Swiss came to us, and Draken went to them, and okay, now like it was just like we're just mixing players back and forth. And for me also, it's like, okay, we need to find someone that is from the outside and that is very promising. And Plopsky was super promising back then. Obviously, 17 years old, rifler. I watched some of his games, and I was like, yeah, I think we need to sign this guy. It was not, from my perspective, it was not about, we need to sign a young talent that's going to be in an IP for years, because I don't know how long I would be in an IP. I just look for what the team at this point really needs. I'm not sure what Hisham, the CEO of NiP, thought about that signing, but that was what I felt. And I do think that Hisham as the CEO was way more involved in NiP back then with the CS team compared to today, because we did not have any GM or support staff around us. It was basically me, the players, and Hisham was on his side. So that was like from my perspective. Then regarding Plopsky, like, was it too early? I think a lot of when you look for the coaches, I don't think we think if it's early or too late, but maybe for the organizations, the GMs, their whole thing is, making the right signing at the right time, and, making the bucks if they want to sell them, like Donk going to Spirit or Monesi going to G2, whatever. So, but that was never the case for me with Plopsky when I brought him in.
What about, what is your take? Look, you don't have to diss any dirt if you don't have any, but what is your take now, years removed, of what was going on with NiP management? As you say, basically, it was just after your era that they sort of put in place. I mean, basically, if people don't know, Kalk, the old Jonas Gunderson, he was like the COO, I think, or something. Now they have Eric Wendell, who's like the director. It's sort of a similar role, but essentially the idea is, like you're saying, it's more like a general manager. It's like, instead of just the coach on the day-to-day stuff and an org at the top who signed the player, the idea is like sports, you get a guy in between who's looking at the bigger picture, like, I've got 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, however long you're there for. What's your take on that? Like, do you have a good memory of NiP? Do you think they lost their way? Where are you at on the org?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, like, this is not specifically just aimed towards NiP, but I think for most of the organizations is that whenever someone makes something work, like let's say Astralis, 2018, they sign a sports psychologist, go and win the major. Everyone gets a sports psychologist.
Yeah, true.
Or me in NiP 2014, we win the major. Me as a coach, everyone gets a coach after. I think the post COVID or during COVID, everyone was a bit obsessed about GMs in CS, and the GMs at the same time was obsessed of making a name for themselves. I'm not talking obviously about everyone.
No, sure.
That wouldn't be fair. But I think, like, let's say Kalk for an example. I think, I've heard good things about him when it comes to business side, so I'm going to leave that aside. But looking into the CS, like the sports side, I think he made a lot of bad decisions. And I don't know if that was motivated by the fact of him, being the profit for Swedish CS later on, or like for NiP, like, holy shit, he did all this, he signed these players, and he made a top winning team, because it was very obvious that he did not know how to make a CS team. And we've seen a lot of these other teams, organizations trying to do the same thing, and it simply doesn't work. And sometimes they leave the players outside of the conversations, like, you're the players, you should just focus on the we are the we're the bosses. But the players 9 out of 10 times know way more how to make a team compared to a GM. And Kalk in this sense was a guy that previously had worked with North, which disbanded, and before that he was off for maybe 10-15 years and playing professionally, or I don't know if you could call that professionally in 2003, but I think it's a lot to demand from a guy like that to come in and say, okay, this is the guy I want as an op, this is the guy I want, la 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 la. Everything looks super good on paper, and then they just come into the server and the roles are just fully fucked, if I can say it like that. And we've seen it with a lot of teams. We saw it with Astralis most recently. Not even making it major. We also saw Cloud9, same thing. It's like, holy shit, this super Russian team is just, they can't make things work. People always ask themselves, like, if we just put in all the best players on each position, you will make it work. But one thing that people always forget about is that every player that is playing super, super good, they also have some expectations on themselves. Like, if me as a player, or let's say you've been a player for a long time, and you're always posting big numbers, 1.15, 1.20 rating throughout your career, and then you go into a new team and you're playing in the position where you're supposed to be some sort of a support player, if we can use that word.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden you're posting, 1.0 rating or even below that. And all of a sudden people are starting to, make comments about you're not in the game anymore. You're lost. What happens to a player like that in 9 out of 10 cases is that player is only thinking about how he can start posting big numbers again, because he wants to be in that same fame position as he was before. And what happens, obviously, is that player is going to focus more on himself than the team. And if he's in the totally wrong position to do that, then the team just falls apart. And we've seen this so many times, and people seem to never, realize this. They're just so obsessed with having the best players according to stats and thinking that it will work, and it very rarely works. Very rarely.
If people don't remember, the era of Dignitas you were working in was the one where, like, it was still like Forest and Freiburg, but then most of the others were gone. Like, Halzoak was still there, but then it was like Heap and Lekro, if people remember it. Get Right and Exist, obviously, years earlier had gone at this point in time, right? At this point, the weird thing about that whole Dignitas project was when they originally made it, obviously they made it as like, let's get the old NiP players back together and play a bunch of LANs. And then they had the COVID thing for a year and a bit more. And then they had like swapped people out. And as I say, people then just sort of got sick of playing even and just gradually moved out their career. What were the expectations when you were in this team? Like, what did you actually think of it? I mean, some of these players are still decent names. Like, there's something to work with here, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was approached by them, they were also very close to making it to the major.
Right.
I think they lost to ENS something on overpass. Like, it was a very close game, and they did some small mistakes. So obviously it was not a dead team in that sense, at least for me, but it was a big step down in terms of skill. Like, I'm not going to say to everyone like, yeah, I took it because of the sports side of it, blah blah blah. I seriously took Dignitas. Like 50%, at least 50% of the decision was the security, because I had been away for a long time prior to Dignitas. Like, we're talking about almost 2 years. For me, it was like, okay, I'm above 30. I obviously I have a future outside of CS, so I need to make some sort of stability. I go to Copenhagen Flames, and I like my salary. It's a normal salary in Sweden, if we say like that. And then we do good, and then someone is coming knocking on the door and says like, okay, here you get 5 times the money. It's like, for me, it was like the decision was a lot about money, and I'm not going to lie to people watching this, and it was money, and I deeply regret it today, because obviously me staying with the Flames guys, knowing what we could have made together, it's rough when I think about it, because I think the future could have been way more different than it actually became, but I remember it was a very tough decision. I remember me, talking to family, my parents, and just trying to get their view of it. But I think me going to Dignitas maybe wasn't the best decision back then. But I took it for the stability financially, and one thing that I learned from that is, in the future I will always. If I have 2 options on the table, I will take the option where I have like the best view of it in a competitive sense, and not the financial, because the money will always come in the future, as long as you perform. So yeah.
As someone who's worked a few times over the years in different eras with Forest and Freiburg to some degree, a question I have goes like this. It's funny because when he was at the absolute top and he was the king of Swedish CS, Forest was the guy who sometimes maybe just chilled on practice a bit and played some Dota and Harden and fucking Rocket Arena or whatever. And he was always the guy who just played a lot of games. But I actually noticed, if people don't know, he's not joking when he says on stream these last couple of years, he still wants to play. He actually would like to be in like a real team and go to lands again. Look, I don't know how full on he wants to go, if he wants to go like the full circle like we used to, but I know that he is actually still motivated to. And I think even when I did my interview with Freiburg a few months back, I think he even went out of his way to sort of mention that he's not technically retired. Like, you know, again, maybe if the offer was, they would. Like, what do you actually think? Obviously, people, the whole topic of like age seems like it's not really as relevant as like what I just said. Like, are you motivated? Do you still want to play? Will you put in the hours? Do you actually want to go to a LAN and grind your way up again? Because obviously the problem these guys are going to face is you're not going to get into phase tomorrow. You're going to have to start in a smaller team. You have to show you got some skills and then parlay it up. I would say the obvious example is how Snappy did it when he got back into the scene and became relevant again. He had to climb step by step, right? Do you think like these people can get chances again? Would you think like, are there teams out there that can use players like that?
Definitely. Like, one thing that I can say about CS in general today is that I think the tactical point of CS, I would say it's pretty bad when watching games. It's a lot of stuff that is not being well thought through. I think one thing that we need to have in mind, the reason why I'm saying this with the older generation of CS player, is that like 10, 15 years ago, when we didn't have these platforms as FACEIT and stuff like that, the way for you to make a name of yourself is playing in a team, going to the next team, and you just climb the ladder through teams.
Sure.
Which meant that you always, learn the team game perspective, and that's how you climbed. But today, you can basically just make one or two good FPL seasons, and then all of a sudden you're on a top team. The thing, like when you compare a player that has climbed through FACEIT, is that obviously they're super skilled individually, but that's where it stops. Like they're very zoned in on the individual part, because playing a solo throughout your career and then joining a team means that you need to master the position that you're at. You're not thinking way too much about what is happening on the other side of the map, whilst you have a player that has gone through team, and he's just like he has how do you say it? Like he has learned the team game of CS. And I think this is like a big issue also for me when I've worked with these players, that I notice on these players that they need way more attention on how they should react, how they need to understand the games. Like when should you take the space, when shouldn't you take the space, when do you need, to sacrifice, when shouldn't you, like all of these things doesn't make sense for them. And I think that is a product of them just playing a solo throughout their career until they get to the top. I kind of forgot the question.
It was about if people like Forest and Freiburg could still play.
Yeah. So regarding those kind of players like Forest, I think this comes a little bit back to the GM question, because GMs think that, okay, I'm a GM like the GM of AC Milan or Liverpool, whatever. Okay, when you hit 30, you're not that interesting anymore. Obviously, football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, or basketball, there is like a physical aspect to it. CS, there's not that much physical. So for me, like even if you're 30, 40, like we don't know yet. We really don't know when the timing is for someone to stop. I think the main question should be like, how much time do you have to put into this game?
Sure.
Like how does your life look outside of CS? Because if you ask a 18 or 19-year-old guy from, I don't know, Ukraine or Estonia, for them it's like, yeah, I finished school, so I wake up in the morning, play CS, I go shit, I go eat, and I play CS, and then I go sleep. And then you maybe ask Forrest, what's your routines like? Yeah, I drive my kids to school in the morning, I come home, I stream, and then my kids come at 4 and I'm with them until 8. Okay, so already there you can see like what are his things in his life.
Priorities or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, priorities, exactly. So can you make it work? Because if someone is putting in 15 hours a day or let's say 10 hours, effective 10 hours, and you are putting in 5 hours, it's very obvious who is going to come on top. And listening to other athletes like Kobe Bryant, I remember I watched a documentary about him, and he was like, I was really bad in the beginning in basket, and then he just played way more than everyone else was doing, and
right.
that's how he eventually became better. And I think that's not only about basketball or CS. I think that's everything in life. No matter if you're working as an accountant, you just put in the hours and practice. I think you will become good. So that is, the topic regarding older players. Like, if you really have the time and energy and motivation to do it, the age should not be a factor.
I want to actually ask you about your time in 0-0 Nation, because first of all, I think most people just remember that org when it used to have Cold Zero and the Brazilians, whereas we're not talking about that one, we're talking about the European mix. But I actually think they would be surprised by some of the names. There's some quite interesting people he worked with. Like, one of them is obviously syrsoN, the old big AWPer. And actually, I remember doing an interview with him where basically he said, if a lot of people don't know this, he chose to bench himself from big. He actually wanted to try an international project, even though, funny enough, he's gone back now because they just made the German super team, haven't they? Like, this is a player where it's funny that he had that reputation as like an onliner, because basically he just got to big when it was online. There was no lands, because even though, look, I don't know that he ever fully developed all his potential, but like the raw talent the guy has is obvious, right? He's got amazing skills.
Yeah, I think syrsoN was by far the best player in 0-0 Nation, at least when I joined. Like, because one thing people, if we just back up a little bit, like the project with 0-0 Nation, I think it was a bit off for me, because I came in last. They made their team and I came in last, and it was not a coincidence that I came in last. It was the decision of the management that let's make the players first, like the team, and then we bring in a coach, which for me was a bit weird, because the dynamics became a bit different, but we can talk about that later. But regarding syrsoN, like when I came in, it was very obvious that he was the best player, not only in terms of what he brought to the team in terms of communication and how we should approach things, but also like the raw skill. Like, he was solo winning us games. And then when the transitions to CS2 came, something happened, and obviously the op was not the same as it was in CSGO with the peakers advantage, and I think the way he played the op was not that good in the beginning of CS2. And I've watched some of his like recent games in big, and even though he's making progress, I don't think he was like that X factor as he was in the beginning of the project in 0-0 Nation. I really do hope he can get there, because that guy also has a lot of like good work ethic. I don't know if that's just something common for Germans, but he has great work ethic, and he is a guy that puts in the hours needed. So yeah.
And then also you had the other German player, JDC, who, if people remember, not only came up from that Mouse NXT project, but I even heard he was basically the one who helped like build that whole squad and helped them get all those players who now are fucking amazing in Mouse. Like, they could probably win a major at this point in time. Who is this guy? Because it certainly sounds from all the discussions around him when he was in Mouse, like he's like a team player type figure and kind of fills what you need to do. Who is this guy?
Yeah, exactly. A team player on and off the server. I think he was extremely, extremely easy to work with. Whatever I wanted to do, he was like always up to it. Obviously, he could ask questions and even has his own ideas and thoughts, but he was very, very easy guy to work with. Like, no matter where you put him in life, like at any workplace, I think everyone will like. That's the kind of guy that you just like to work with. He's not stubborn in any sense. Obviously, he has his ideas, but he is also like, you can hear when a person is listening to you and when a person is not listening, and that guy was listening. And then also he had tremendous skill. I don't think he had the opportunity to show that in mouse sports towards the end. Mainly, I think he maybe took on the more tougher roles, and I think that's also just goes hand in hand with what kind of guy he is. That whatever is needed for the team, he will be there. But there's a lot of potential for that guy. You can maximize him way more. And I think for him, being in 0-0 Nation was a good opportunity, because we actually treated him as the best rifler in the team, which meant that he got way more space, and I think he posted really good in the games. Also, like statistically, I think he had like 1.2 rating or something. So he was really, really good. And then obviously, I don't know how the situation for him is in Big right now, but I don't think he is on the top of the ladder as he was in syrsoN Nation. So
and then speaking of older players, right? When people talk about Danish in-game leaders, actually they forget that birdfromsky has now been around a while, trying to sort of ply his trade. He's obviously 30 years old, but as we've seen, you can be 30 and be good as a Danish in-game leader. It turns out, who was this guy then?
Yeah, so this guy is also like, he is in a positive way, like a nerd. CS, very similar to the other Danish IGLs. Also, it's like a competition within the Danish IGL scene. Who is the biggest nerd? sorry. But yeah, he puts a lot of hours, and he's a very smart guy in terms of CS. I think individually, maybe not the strongest in terms of individual skill, but he has his moments when he makes it work. I think his strongest thing is the time that he puts into it, and he looks at CS a bit outside of the box, and I think he comes out with a lot of new stuff that in the beginning might look weird, but then a couple of months later you see some top team picking up what he did. Like just the other day I saw a clip where the clips showed like top teams have started using this smoke on Vertigo, and they smoke from T-spawn and it lands on sandbags on Vertigo. Like that smoke that they are throwing right now, he threw I think in September or October last year.
Right.
So I mean, that's the kind of guy that he is. Like he is thinking outside of the box, not trying to copy what other teams are doing. I think, and also he has, for making it in CS, I think he has his priorities right. It's the computer, it's his bedroom, and that's pretty much it. And age for him should not be an issue as it is right now.
You alluded to it earlier, like when you said there that essentially they announced the lineup, but you were like the last person added. It's just like, right, here's the players, just work with these players. Are you a type of coach you prefer to have like some say in the roster construction, or like what roles you're getting people for? Is that what you're implying?
Yeah, I think like if you want to make it as a coach, I think if you were to have another word for a coach, it should be like leader. And I think being a leader coming in last and not having a say with the lineup, even though the lineup was good, but you not having a say, it feels like you're coming in as a supportive coach. And also like I think Bird was the guy who vouched for me to come into syrsoN Nation, even though the management tried not to make it sound like that, but I'm pretty sure he was a big reason for it. And, imagine then, you come in, and this immediately some sort of like conflict of interest. You know that this guy is a big reason why you're here. How are you going to, be extra tough on that guy? Like I can't even kick him because that would just go against me morally. If that was the case.
Sure, yeah.
So it was very rough, and even if this lineup would have been the same, me coming in early in the project would have made way more sense, and I think I would have felt way more comfortable and making the right decisions at the right time. But I think this whole project was, at least from my perspective, it was very weird, to say the least.
Being as you say, you were basically one of the first official coaches in Counter-Strike. I mean, the joke is like the role didn't even exist at the time. You had to like ask for stuff like, can I stand behind him? Can I have a headset? Can I be on fucking PC? Like they did used to treat everyone like they were managers back in the day. But obviously the role has evolved over the years. Massive names like Zonic have had their own fame doing so. So here's my question to you. If you were the coach of a team today, what has changed over the years? I mean, I got the vibe early on, part of even how your style was like, right, there's some of these legendary players I've known from when I was a pro, I was around the scene, so I can sort of like, sometimes I can be a shoulder for them to cry on, I can help them with things, I can work one-on-one with people's morale and stuff. There was some tactical stuff being built in there, some things about smokes and whatnot. Like, how has it changed over the years? I mean, we're almost talking about like 10 years now, so how is Pita different now?
a big difference in terms of the infrastructure around the team, around the coach. I think the biggest difference is back then, my title in NiP was never a coach, or at least in the beginning. I remember when NiP went out with the news of me joining them, it was like NiP add Pita as a strategic advisor.
Okay.
And I remember Lurpis, Tommy, he wrote to me, he was like, did you pick that title yourself? Because for future references, I was like, no, they chose it themselves. But yeah, I was a strategic advisor. So I think the biggest difference is obviously, there's way more pressure on you as a coach from the management to make a good, good structure in all regards. You are the voice of the team towards the management. Back then, it was like you were the sixth player. As a coach today, you're not the sixth player anymore. You have 1 foot in the management and 1 foot in the team. Back then, you had both feet in the team, basically. So I would say that is the biggest difference. And obviously, I think as time goes, much more and more money will be put into the infrastructure of a team. And that's what we're seeing in some of these teams. They have the head coach, they have an assistant coach, and they have 1 or 2 analysts, and then they have a sports psychologist. Like, I did not have 4 or 5 guys working with me back then. It was me as a coach. And I remember even like during the major final that we end up winning, Kasad, the coach of Bleed, he was at that event. He was coaching a team from India. Which was very weird, but whatever. But he was coaching that team from India. And I remember him coming up to me, I think when we did it, right after we did the vetoes, he was like, Peter, do you need any help from me? So he was like my assistant coach during the major final, because I remember we played the first map and then we're off the stage for like 10 or 15 minutes. And, 10 out of those 15 minutes, I was talking to Kasad, and he actually took his time to go and watch FNATIC, how they played on, I think it was Cobblestone or Inferno, I can't remember. But he actually took his time and was like, okay, and stratting FNATIC games, like, okay, this is what they like to do, like, blah, blah, blah. So I was just trying to, get all the information that I could. But yeah, apart from the help of from Kasad during that major final, the biggest difference is obviously all the new people coming in, helping the coach. So the coach today is actually more of a head coach than it was before. Before it was, you could call him a coach, but I would say more of a sixth player.
One thing I actually think is causing a lot of fans problems when they're evaluating big name coaches is obviously now, without mentioning the specific names, you have these giant figures who are like the legends of Counter-Strike players, like Hall of Famers, major winners, great in-game leaders. And the assumption people make is that they're going to be the same mind and figure and personality when they become a coach. But I can tell you, Peter, one thing that would probably shock a lot of fans is when I've even talked to some of these coaches privately and asked them, like, what's going on? I thought you'd have like this player whipped into shape, or like doesn't seem like they're taking what you're saying on board. And they tell me, like, believe it or not, for some of them, when they take that job, it's not the same as being a player. Like when you're a player, you've got the fact that every day it's like being the star player of the team. You're beating everyone in practice. Everyone knows you're the man. You don't have to convince people. They buy in because you're the star. But they say when you become a coach, sometimes you do feel like you reset a little bit and you have to sort of earn that status. And even if you were a legendary player, I'm sorry, in the modern day, you might talk to some 18-year-old kid who's like, look, man, I never saw you play. Like, were you good? Like, they don't get it. They were around back then. They weren't watching old YouTube clips. Like, have you also found this? Is it like a different style of how you get buy-in to people when you're a coach?
Yeah, I remember, like, in the beginning as a coach, after NiP, the first stint that I had, the most easiest thing that you could always say is like, this is what we did in NiP, because you have the recipe of a major winning lineup. If we did that in NiP, then obviously it will work here. But as time went, I was like, I really need to get rid of that way of communication. So I started not talking about this is how we did in that team, blah blah blah, and started more of trying to explain things. And I think maybe I've just been very lucky in that regard to the players that I've worked with, or maybe it's just because I've maybe worked with less strong players at that time. Considering I work with most recently 00 Nation, and then obviously Dignitas. It was my old teammates that already knew how I was, and before that it was Copenhagen Flames, which was a bunch of nobodies at that time. Maybe for the coaches that are working with big player names like Simple or like, I don't know, like really, really strong names, maybe they have a much more tough time, because I think they also think that they have the recipe of making it, how to succeed. And I think it doesn't really matter who you are. So I think like the general thing about that is how good are you at communicating and them buying into what you want to do. At the same time, I think you can never be stuck too long in the way that you should play. I think you always have to try to evolve, and I think that is one of the reasons why we're seeing like legendary players who have had a super nice run. Like if we take the Brazilians for an example, Fallen and all these guys, like their meta that they had in 2016 was super nice. But you cannot have that meta and think that you can make that meta work in 2024. Like you have to adapt. And if you're that stubborn that you're not willing to listen to even a 16-year-old coming into the team, coming in with ideas, like if you're not willing to listen to that guy, you're not going to make it. So I think for me, I have never been that, this is the way and this is the way only. For me, is trying to listen to what everyone has. But obviously, if we have to move in some direction and I see that we're not moving, then I have, to take the lead. And I try to do it with good communication and, trying to pursue them into doing it. Obviously, sometimes people are asking questions. I can hear that they're not 100% buying into it. But I think as a coach, you just have to take the tough decisions. You have to make people listen. And also, when you have the management, in the back, and telling you that this is your project, and the players know that, and you're also like, as a coach, you say like, okay, we'll do it. If you don't want to do it, the bench is over there. I think when you have that kind of mindset and the players know it, then I think they will buy into it. But I cannot say how it is working with big player names in that sense as Simple or those, because like Prime Simple, I would never be able to tell him like, listen to me or the bench is over there. Like I'm pretty sure Nadi would bench me 150 times before they will bench Simple once. So yeah.
One thing actually that I think you touched on it earlier that I think some coaches have made a mistake on, it's the same problem some in-game leaders have in Counter-Strike. Like I've had people, like I won't mention names, people can guess if they've watched my shows, who were like friends of mine who were really good in-game leaders, as in they could do amazing tactics and anti-strat all day long and find like the unique edge that you can have in a game. But I used to tell them that it's in the fucking name, in-game leader. You're not just tactician, mate. Like you're not just like strategic advisor or whatever. Like we could give you that title too if that's all you do is the tactics. But the thing I think a lot of them missed was they missed like the human element, the being a captain, being a figure beyond just like go here on the map or we're going to beat them on train or something, right? I feel like some coaches have lost that too. I've seen some coaches who have great tactical minds, or it's like you say, they're more of a supportive element. I'm just here to facilitate communication and conversation. And it's like I actually feel like another area people miss with coaches is like the human element. Whereas in your case, if people don't know, even when you were a pro player, one of the things you were famous for was you would always have friends in the team that you got to know, and you got to know like what's going on with this guy and what do we need from him and how do we communicate to the other player. Feels like you've always focused on this element as well. It's not just about like the player and the server, right?
Yeah, I think I don't want to make it sound like I am super good at it. If I can say it like in some sort of a humble ways, that I think my strongest thing is like knowing people or people skills in that sense. Obviously, I've played this game for a very long time, so I know the tactical side of it, and I can actually like be extremely tactical if needed. But for me, it's always been trying to see what the people need in the team, what the players need in the team, in order for them to be at their optimal level. And looking at different teams today, we have some teams that I could just see, from the outside perspective, like their coach. Okay, this is a 100% coach that's just fully focused on the human side of it. And then you have coaches that are like human interactions. If you talk to them at events, it's like nothing, but they're super good at CS. And I think I wouldn't like focus too much on that, because I think with the infrastructure there is today, I think you can have a super nerd as a coach and then you can have a sports psychologist who is the
Right.
bro of the team, And at the same time, if you take Vitality, their coach have a really strong.
Stas.
Yeah, thank you. Like for me, from an outside perspective, without even knowing too much of him as an individual, but from the outside perspective, it's way more mental when I look at him, how he is with the team. And obviously, maybe he has people around him that are super, super strong tactically. So, we really don't need to have one guy who knows everything. And even if you have that one guy knowing everything, I think there's not enough hours in the day to be able to use all that knowledge. So I'm perfectly fine with having coaches that are very strategical, and at the same time, coaches that are very, good with working with people. But I would put myself somewhere in the middle. When I was with Dignitas or NiP, it was more of the, mental kind of a coach. While Copenhagen Flames, it was like 95% strategic, I would say. So I can adapt to the environment that I'm in, I would say.
If people are unaware, you are available to be a coach again. You want to coach at the top level again and be a part of the tournaments, etc., right?
Yeah. I have, as I said, I've made some bad decisions in terms of where to go. What I mentioned with Copenhagen Flames going to Dignitas, with all the respect for the Dignitas players and the management. Obviously, it's nothing towards them, but I like with all this that has happened, I feel like there's so much more that I can prove, and it would really suck. I think if I end up become very old or old like 60, 70, and I'm about to go to another world. I'm pretty sure I would, if I just stopped today, I'm pretty sure that I would be very dissatisfied with me not,
right,
trying to do whatever I can. Because the most awesome thing for me would be to get a team that is actually solid or have a solid future, and actually just go and like win the major. And I'm pretty sure I can say it right now. If I would go and win the major with any team, I would leave the day after, and
right.
just call it.
Okay.
Because then I feel that I've actually done what I wanted to. I wanna stop at the top, and right now I'm not near the top. So yeah.
At the end of this interview, do you have a final message? You want to thank anyone or say hello to anyone?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that I would like to thank, but thank everyone for supporting, and especially those people who, with everything that has been said about me, people who actually use their brain and not believing in everything that they read. But also the people who doesn't believe, because you're fueling me. So Thanks to everyone.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.
In this esports world, it can seem like everyone's against you, but I've always got the Illuminati, my Patreon community, riding with me, and it is thanks to the support of the following people, this video and all of them on my channel are made possible. Matt, Pugnatio, Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Frisky, Tosh, Jensen Goh, Animosity, Thooorin, Tobias Bernasconi. If you've ever watched my videos, you know now I'm going to give a massive shout out to Jerky's Minion, the main man. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers? Find out who the upcoming interview guests are. Maybe you want to ask me a question. I tend to answer them at length in my video AMA. Do you want to take part in one of those Dignitas discussions where we talk about what you're interested in esports? Well, if any of these perks or more appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today, where in the description box below is a Patreon link.